Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another For Atlanta event. At Buckhead Church, we want you to know that we are for you and we are for this city. So wherever you are and whatever stage of life you find yourself in, we want you to know that we're for your health, your leadership, your relationships, your family, and the impact that you have on the people around you and on this city. And so we have gathered experts in all of these different types of areas to meet you where you are and help you grow in 2021. So we'd love for you to stay tuned each month for a new event, because we know that the more you grow and the more we can invest in you, the more the city will grow and the better the city will become. So this month, we're focusing on relationships. And I know with this being February and this is Valentine's Day month that we might be focused on romantic relationships, but our conversation today is really more about all of our relationships, because we're gonna be talking about how we gather together with friends, family, coworkers, and yes, I know, even in the midst of a pandemic where it kind of seems like gathering was a distant memory, we're gonna be talking about why it's even more important in this day, in this age, in this pandemic, to gather and gather meaningfully. So we invited Priya Parker to discuss her new approach to how we gather that we hope will be transformative with the way that you spend your time together with the people in your life. You may know Priya from her podcast, Together Apart, or from her more recent book, The Art of Gathering. And what Priya does is she sets forth this incredible new approach to gathering that will help everyone create meaningful, memorable experiences, whether you're gathering with large or small groups of people, whether you're gathering at work or you're gathering at home or you're gathering with your friends. So we cannot wait for you to hear what she has to say. So let's get started as we hear what she is going to communicate about the art of gathering. Well, Priya Parker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Priya, I don't know if this is inappropriate to say, but I kind of have a crush on your career. It is exceptional. When I look at what you have done, one, you're kind of a described master facilitator, conflict negotiator, strategic advisor, and it seems like you have worked with literally everyone on the planet and with every meaningful issue that is kind of going on in the world right now. You've worked with corporate executives, government officials, the Obama administration. You've weighed in on race relations, peace processes in the Arab world. Do you look at your life ever and just wonder, like, how did I get to do this?
Yeah. I think that I try to be present to what is in front of me, and am very grateful when I feel like I'm doing something that is like addressing a real need. And I think like that's what gives me fuel.
Yeah. Well, it feels like you're being very successful at it. We were talking earlier just about, wanting to, solve problems in the world. And that feels like that's what you're helping do. So thanks for everything you do. And for our audience who may not be familiar with you, they don't know you, why don't you just kind of describe for them your work and what you're currently doing?
So I am a conflict resolution facilitator, but for groups. So not one-on-one mediation or counseling, really at the level of the group. I wrote a book called The Art of Gathering, and in it, I basically try to demystify what professional facilitators are trained to do, which is to create meaningful connection despite significant obstacles between people for our everyday gatherings. And, I'm not an event planner. I'm not a particularly good cook, as my husband can attest. I am not a floral expert. And so much of our wisdom on gatherings has been kind of outsourced to people who are experts on the shaping of things. Right? So It's almost like a proxy. If you go into a bookstore, you go online, over the last 40 years, to know how to gather well, you kind of see recipe books, right? Or you see lighting books, or you see floral books. And that frustrated me because it was this kind of underlying assumption that if you can shape things, everything else takes care of itself. And I knew as a facilitator that just was not true. And so the core of my work is my day job is still to work with groups that are in conflict, that have different visions of their future. But one of my passions is to help everybody and anybody create meaningful experiences for and with their people without all having to be the same.
I could not appreciate what you said more. You are not an event planner. This is not about how to throw a cool party, right? But you are more in the business of when we do gather, right? How is it significant? How is it meaningful? How does it change us, moving forward? And I think we're all looking for that. Everybody's looking for meaning and significance. And you talk about this so well. We've all been to gatherings, parties, events that just fell flat. It wasn't fun. Maybe you were looking forward to it, but you just left going, we could have done so many other things with our time. And my wife and I were talking not long ago about how when you have something significant, you want to share it, right? Every kind of moment of meaning, every kind of moment of beauty, you want it to share it with someone. And so we were just talking about this idea of like, man, when you have a moment with people, it just feels like that's what you were meant to experience in life. How did you figure out that's what you wanted to do? Like create meaning for people? Was it a moment for you?
I mean, I think like so many of us are, you're sort of attracted to the work very much based on your own life experiences, and kind of, at least in conflict resolution, there's this concept of like the wounded healer, which is as we are trying to figure out our own stuff, our own communities, our own hurts, and use our lived experiences to begin to understand the tools that heal. You kind of put one foot in front of the other. I grew up in a family. I grew up in a way in 3 families over time. So my mother is Indian. My father is white American. For the first kind of 12 years of their life, they met at Iowa State many years ago, and they were kind of each other's source of rebellion. They lived in a number of different countries. I was born in Zimbabwe because it was the closest good hospital that would accept an interracial couple at the time to where they were living. And they eventually moved back to the States and to Virginia. And within a year, they separated. Within 2 years, they divorced. And within 3 years, they had each remarried other people. And they each remarried people who in many ways kind of reflected their original worldview. And I'm their only child, and they had joint custody. So every 2 weeks, I would go back and forth between these 2 homes. And it was and still is, very, very, very different homes with completely different worldviews. So I would leave my mother and stepfather's home, and that was an Indian, British, Buddhist, agnostic, theosophist, vegetarian, progressive, liberal, global home, and travel 1.4 miles and enter my father and stepmother's home. And it was and still is a white American, evangelical Christian, conservative, Republican, twice a week church going, basketball playing, meat eating family. And I was a part of both. And, my name is Priya Parker, and you can kind of, guess which side is which.
Right.
And I've always been interested in when and why and how we come together, and also when and why and how we come apart. And part of what I learned, growing up, was the way we do anything is some mix of invented and inherited. And I had these 2 different homes simultaneously. The way they began a dinner was different, right? Do you pray? Do you not pray? If you pray, what words do you use? What are the symbols used? What is the conversation allowed? What is considered normal? What is the food that is served? How is it served? Who eats first? Who cleans up? All of those things simultaneously. I had 2 very different realities. And so I knew that there wasn't just one truth. And a huge part of my work, it wasn't like I had this okay, I'm going to be a conflict resolution facilitator. But I knew that I was really interested in the interstitching of groups and also the conscious unraveling of groups. And I wanted to kind of work in that space.
Well, the unraveling of groups seems like a very relevant topic considering the world that we're living in right now, which, my gosh, like I said, I wish we had an hour and a half because I would love your take on so many things that we're experiencing as a country and as a nation and as families, with politics and religion and all those things that are kind of coming to the forefront for a lot of people. You don't need me to tell anybody that this is kind of a divisive time. Mm-hmm. So what your work you're doing is super significant. At Buckhead Church, we're gathering people all the time. We're not gathering people on Sundays. We haven't done that since the pandemic started. We're gathering in homes. People are gathering in different small ways all throughout the city. We are a church of primarily single adults as well. Our city is primarily single adults, which is, it's really difficult right now for single adults to get together, to meet new people and connect. And so it feels like gatherings for everybody, they're just at like a premium right now. So we don't want anything that we experience with people to be deflating. So talk to us about how you define a gathering. And why do you think so many of our gatherings miss the mark?
So I define a gathering as any time 3 or more people come together for a purpose with a beginning, middle, and end. So first of all, 3 or more matters. This is not about a marriage or a business partnership. There's elements that can absolutely help those relationships, but this is really about the life of groups. How do you create experiences for 3 or more people, with 3 or more people? What actually happens when you start having 12 people or 20 people?
Is this a gathering, Priya?
This is a gathering. I would say this is a gathering when we are being witnessed by your church. So right now, this is a conversation, but it becomes a gathering. And in a way, psychologically, it's a gathering because both you and I mean, technology makes this weird because it's a gathering that's happening asynchronously. But for me, this becomes a gathering when the third leg of the stool, if you will, which is in this case, your community, begins to partake. And
makes sense.
But you know, a gathering basically isn't the same thing as a community. Communities have gatherings. Gatherings can create a sense of community. But when I say a gathering, I really mean a specific tool, an intervention that we're doing all the time, right? It's not rocket science. Our days are filled with gatherings. But many of our gatherings, pre-pandemic and right now as well, tend to be vague and diluted, in part because many of them are responding to needs that are no longer relevant. And so the form doesn't make sense. In many contexts in our workplaces, or places, or even, you know, public contexts where we're diversifying, a good thing, where we no longer all believe the same thing, a good thing, in part to not offend one another. A lot of the specifics of our gatherings get thrown out, and you end up kind of, you know, the equivalent of like everybody having beer in a living room, or, you know, like wandering around the conference area. And so a big part of, I think, our modern opportunity is for each of us to become facilitators, to become gatherers, and to ask, in my life, for my people, and that may be different people for different contexts, what is the need now? And how might I bring people around that need in a way that feels specific, unique, and actually addressing the need that this group happens to have?
So you wrote in your introduction, I just want to read it quickly because I thought it was so good, and I think it'll give people a good kind of baseline for what you're writing about. But you said, everybody has the ability to gather well. You don't have to be an extrovert. In fact, some of the best gatherers I know suffer from social anxiety. You don't need to be a boss or a manager. You don't need a fancy house. The art of gathering, fortunately, doesn't rest in your charisma or the quality of your jokes. But gatherings crackle and flourish when real thought goes into them, when structure, often invisible, is baked into them, and when a host has the curiosity, the willingness, and the generosity of spirit to try. 1, way to write. That was just so good. And 2, what's a first step? There's a lot of people listening. They want to have meaningful gatherings. You write very specifically about some things you need to think through. Could you walk people through just a couple of things they need to begin to make sure these gatherings are meaningful, and maybe give examples of ones that have, or examples of ones that fall flat, just so people can get an idea of what you're talking about?
So first, the biggest mistake we make when we gather is we assume that our purpose is obvious, that the purpose of gathering is obvious and shared. We tend to not ask. We tend to skip the purpose. So a wedding. We assume it's obvious. Oh, the purpose of a wedding is to get married, right? No, you can go to City Hall, technically, to do that. Why are you bringing a group of people on a specific date to do what? And often, because we don't ask that question, we have proxy wars about it, right? Do we invite your mother's colleague, or does that last invitation go to your college buddy? that's actually a conflict over fundamentally who this wedding is for first. In some contexts and some cultures, the wedding first and foremost is to actually honor the elders, is to honor the parents. It's the parents' last right of being a parent and marrying off their children, and they can go and, they've done their work. In other contexts, the first and primary purpose is to unite two individuals, and they get to choose and introduce who their tribes are. But that's true also for a birthday party. Like, many of our birthday parties end up sort of just being the same thing year after year after year after year. But we are changing, right? What I may want on my 25th birthday, or what I need on my 25th birthday, may be very different than where I am as a 37-year-old. And so rather than asking, what do I want to do this year, to start with a different question, which is, what is my need? And the biggest thing you can do for a gathering is to first think, what is the purpose? What is my need? And who can help me fulfill that? I'll give a simple example. A friend of mine a couple of years ago really wanted to quit her job. And she was at one of these fancy consulting firms that were really, really good at like sort of keeping you in, right? This is you're about to exit, you get a promotion, as you get the golden handcuffs. And she realized this was happening. And so she invited 6 friends who she thought of as courageous to a quitting party. And she realized that many people in her life were, including her some family members, including people at that firm, that their fears and their worries were contagious. And so there were some people that when she said, I'm thinking of quitting, they'd respond with things like, are you sure you want to do that? You want to leave all the security? Right? They were magnifying her fears. And then there was a few other people in another context that would blow courage her way. Finally, I'm so excited to hear you say this. I know you've been wanting to do this for so long. And so she invited 6 people to a tea, if I remember correctly. It was like a Saturday at 4 p.m. And she invited each of us to bring something, an object or a poem that brought us courage in our life, and to share it with the group. And we went and we did that, and we ate and we broke bread together. And then she committed to us that she would quit within a specific date, and that she asked us to hold her to it. And it was meaningful for each of us because, first of all, she was also seeing us, right? She was acknowledging that I noticed that you are somebody who makes brave decisions, right? She's also spreading the norm of bravery, right? Another example, when somebody breaks up with somebody, our default instinct is to say, oh, I'm so sorry. But often it's one of the best decisions they've made. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Congratulations on your bravery. I'm so delighted you finally found your voice. So the way we gather actually affects norms and belief systems, and what we believe is worthy of celebrating and what we believe is worthy of marking, sort of what you were talking earlier about with your wife, which is, there's an organization called Girls Night In. They were founded before the pandemic, but they became really relevant in this moment. And one of the things the founder, Alicia Ramos, tweeted a while ago or Instagrammed a while ago was something like, why don't we host dissertation defense parties with as much hurrah as we do bachelorettes, right? Again, you may or may not agree with it, but it's starting like when you actually do almost like an audit of the people in your life or the people on popular culture. Like what we're celebrating or choose to celebrate or mark tells us a lot about our values. And yet we don't often think about like what we want to be celebrating. And part of the art of gathering is to first ask, what is the specific need or purpose? And then who can actually come together and are either willing or able to do this with me in this way, for this night, for this birthday, that may never happen again.
Yeah, you said in your book about how much specificity matters, and you just need to keep asking the question, why are we doing this, until you hit either a belief or a value. I thought that was just so good because it just takes a few seconds of thought to go, what do I want to have happen tonight? What do I want to have happen this afternoon at this birthday party, at this work, at this small group? And just go, I need to not do this unless there is a specific value or a purpose or a belief that I'm getting to the bottom of. And then that's where the magic happens.
And I
think that's fantastic.
And that's where the meaning happens, right? So again, so much of how we've been trained is that meaning lies in stuff, right? Whether it's even if you go back to the archetype of a wedding or a dinner party, like that the way to form meaning is through the stuff on the table, right? The beautiful crystal or the beautiful, what are your colors at a wedding? And it's not that that stuff doesn't matter, but we're over relying on objects, and it's also expensive. It's exclusive. Right. It's spending money on things that you may not actually match your values. So part of it,
Priya, preach it.
it's shifting a lens to say, I can make meaning through people, not through objects. So, another example, I had a friend, this actually, in a way, it's sort of similar to the quitting party. He was turning 50, and he was kind of bummed about it. And he was surprised he was bummed about it because he wasn't somebody who had ever worried or felt old or, worried about birthdays. And he thought about it and he realized he was worried because a lot of the people in his life, he realized, began to, as he put it, contract after they turned 50. They took less risks. They moved to less cities. They had the same friends. And he really wanted to make sure, when he thought most clearly, what is it that I most want or need on my 50th? And he realized, I want to make sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who continue to expand and to help me expand. And so what he did for his 50th was very simply invite 12 people to dinner. And at the beginning, so listen to my words, this is in 45 seconds, he creates an extraordinary shift in meaning. Everybody sits down at the table. They're happy to see him. They don't all know each other. It's already lovely. But he dings his glass and he just says, what I just said to you, I'm turning 50. You all may be wondering why you're here. Yes, it's to, have a good time. But I actually want to say you each are here are people who have always, when a decision comes up, you choose to expand. And I admire that about you. And I want you to continue to help me expand as I, become an old fogey. And in that moment, he was honoring his people. He was seeing them. He was creating a norm of expansion. And he also, all of a sudden, gave everybody a point of context. He didn't then have to control or structure the next 3 hours, but he was giving a common unifying element that people could talk about whatever, but adventure and in 30 seconds, helped each of us know how the shared values we each held, right? This isn't rocket science. And that's when I say it's not expensive, but it's like chiseling away everything else and saying, what is my need? Who are the people in this moment who could help me? And how do I share that with them so that they can be in on the secret? And
it's kind, because now you know how you're contributing to the gathering. You're not wondering how you fit and what you contribute. It is kind.
It's generous.
I know we don't have a ton of... Yes, it is generous. That's a better word for it. So gatherings look different. We're in COVID, and we don't know how long this is going to be, but gatherings will probably look different forever, right? This is permanently going to shift how we gather in the future. So there's a lot more things that are happening online. What have you seen and what have you learned in the last 9-10 months about these new types of gatherings? And what are some of your favorite examples of people who are doing this well?
So when when COVID hit, or I think it was the second week of March, I think when most of us realized this is different than anything we've
This
is
serious.
That's right. A little sort of peek behind the curtain. For the last 6 months before that, had been working with the New York Times on a podcast that was supposed to be called Gathering with Priya Parker. Every episode, we were following somebody into a gathering that we were helping them reimagine. A bride and a groom reimagining their wedding, and literally had voice memos recording on their phone, getting the surround sound of their weddings, a school doing a fundraiser. And a producer texted me that week and he said, a show called Gathering now sounds like a horror film.
Yeah, a little bit tone deaf.
And so we paused and pivoted and realized that the questions were still coming in. Do I do my wedding on Zoom? How do we hold a church service? How do I teach this course? And we launched as a distributed team a podcast that explored the question you're just asking, which is, how do we be together apart? And every episode, you can get it wherever you get podcasts. Every episode is one person, a sister trying to host this 18-year-old birthday for her younger sister whose prom has been canceled, whose high school graduation has been canceled, but doesn't want it to be awkward teenagers staring at each other over Zoom. right? Like how do you do this?
Right.
And I would say that the biggest thing I've seen, the biggest shift is our previously, we have this nostalgia of like when we used to gather. But if you kind of dig a little under, a lot of our gatherings were not that great, right? They're vague, they're diluted, right? You're texting under the table. But part of the element was, one, we were on autopilot, but two, a lot of our in-person gatherings were subsidized by the great coffee that you could get up from the table and go get a sip of, by the bathroom break where you run into somebody, by the almonds, those great almonds in the middle of the table that you can munch on while, someone drones on. And the biggest difference I see in our virtual gatherings is you can no longer hide a bad meeting.
Oh yeah, that's good. True.
And so
everybody knows it.
Everybody knows it because all we have is context and language and the way we structure our time. And the emperor can't have any clothes anymore because we're all just staring at each other in these squares. And so the biggest shift I see is people are starting, it's like an accelerator to make everybody realize if you want to gather well, there needs to be a purpose. There should be some good structure. There are best practices to get people meaningfully engaged in the first 5%. And we can't rely on people walking through doorways. They're clicking in and out of Zoom buttons. And you're going from being a parent on a parent-child teacher conference to a football coach to a team player in 45-minute increments at a time. And so all of a sudden, we are all guesting all day long and we are all hosting all day long. And we all are feeling the pain of it when it's not good. And so it's made all of us moderators in a pretty speedy time.
It has. What would you say to, we got a city that we're in the middle of full of single adults who, everything you just described they're doing, right? Work, friendships, all those kinds of things. So many single adults are wanting to meet people and connect, right? And just build their community out. And you can't do that in person right now. We put on tons of gatherings in the city for single adults. Have you seen anything for people meeting new people, like strangers online? That just seems really difficult. Have you seen any success or any suggestions you have for a single adults trying to build community?
I think that there are apps trying to figure this out. I think the one doing the best job right now is called Clubhouse. It's audio only. It's invite only, but they're starting to expand very rapidly. It's conversation based and you can kind of enter and exit rooms. But we, for the podcast, the Together Apart, we actually did a dating in quarantine episode, and meaning speed dating with strangers. It's actually maybe one of my favorite episodes because it was a Canadian entrepreneur whose company pre-COVID was speed dating. It was in-person speed dating. And she called us up and said, she was a company that she thought she was going to have to go under. And she wondered, can you do this virtually? And we created a Cupid in quarantine. We actually created a speed dating session, and that's the episode. But the reason I said yes was because we were exploring this underlying idea, which is there are actually certain things now that you can do that you would never otherwise do if you're meeting a stranger like in another context. So we had these couples do things like show us the inside of your refrigerator. Right?
Oh, that's good.
Right.
That's
if
scary.
You have like broccoli and beer, or if it's packed full, or is it full of a CSA, or is it full of Taco Bell, or like, that's just a lot of data. We had them do things like give us a tour of your, of the 3 photos that are most important to you in your home. All of these things that you wouldn't necessarily do on a first date. And that insight, this goes to dating, but it goes to something deeper, which is we are at a moment where we're experimenting. Like we are all kind of, whether you're working from home in some version, not everybody, but many people, but we have this lifeline called the internet. And there are a lot of people experimenting with how to, beyond just talking one-on-one at each other, to create new experiences. But I think the biggest thing is whether you have a creative community like a church or like Creative Mornings is another organization that's really experimenting with helping people meet each other.
Yeah, they do great work.
But I think the biggest thing is to find places of common interest and common activities and ask larger communities to host those spaces.
Priya, if people want to follow you and pay more attention to your work, like how can they find you? How can they follow you? Where are you on the World Wide Web?
So the best would be to follow me on Instagram, which is my name, at Priya Parker. We often have lively debates there about gathering together apart and all that we are seeing. And then to also sign up for my newsletter. We send out once a month, once every 3 weeks, a very specific newsletter on many of these questions. And so to do that, you can text the word GATHER, GATHER, to 66866 to sign up for the newsletter. And send me your examples, because so much of what we do is really based on what we're seeing in the world, and gathering well is contagious. So good luck, and thank you for having me.
Well, Priya, thank you again so much for sharing your insight with us, for spending your time with us, and helping us go forward to create meaningful and significant gatherings. We're really grateful that you were here. What you just heard Priya talk about how important our gatherings are, and even more importantly, how important it is to have significant and meaningful gatherings. I'm so glad that she is for us, that she's for our church, that she's for your relationships, that she's for this city. I just love the fact that she communicated to us that categories doesn't necessarily equate to purpose. Just because it has a name doesn't mean it's gonna have meaning. Let's just give a little bit of extra time to ask the question, what do I hope comes out of this gathering? What belief am I trying to get to? What value do I want to hold high, so that when we leave time with our friends and our family and our coworkers, we left having done something that really mattered. Well, I hope this conversation left you feeling inspired and encouraged as you think about your next gathering. I know I will 100% be thinking about all of these things as I get together with my next groups of people. But if you want to learn more about Priya and all that she does, like she said in the event, text GATHER to 66866. Text GATHER to 66866 to join the Art of Gathering newsletter community. And as always, please join us back next month for another For Atlanta event, because again, the more you grow, the more the city of Atlanta grows. So we'll continue to grow Atlanta together. Thanks so much for being here. One more time, we are for you, because never forget that God is for you. And we'll see you next time.